The job of America's correctional officers is often thankless. However, First Responder Nation recognizes the importance of the thin gray line. We have curated a collection of corrections collectibles, including challenge coins, medallions, pins, keychains, and more, all available at amazing prices. Use promo code USA10 to save 10% off your order. Spend $30 and shipping is free to any address within the United States. Click the link to get yours now at www.correctionalofficernation.com.
Hello everyone, I'm Gary York and I'm happy to be here today with Captain Duane Canady, a retired captain from the Florida Department of Corrections who did 25 years of service. And today we're going to talk about the life of a correctional officer. And Captain Canady is going to tell us things that he's run into during his career. And I do want to put a little warning disclaimer. After we introduce Captain Canady and get his history, we're going to actually talk about some real incidents that occurred at the prison that he worked at for 25 years. So 18 or above, I'm going to put a warning disclaimer that somebody under 18 probably should not watch this video because of some of the things we're going to talk about, because we want to talk about true life of a correctional officer and what correctional officers have to deal with. So some of these stories, they'll be short stories, but they will be actual stories that Captain Canady encountered. Captain Canady, thanks for being here today.
It's good to be here.
Captain Canady, before you became a correctional officer, you know, we all have this history that we did something before we became a correctional officer and what made us become a correctional officer. What did you do prior to becoming a correctional officer?
I was an environmental technician for mines, CF Chemicals in Bartow, Florida, and after 13 years, the mine shut down. So everyone that worked there was laid off, and so it was kind of a rough go there for a while. So I did a lot of different jobs. Went to work for a beer company selling beer for a while, and Coca-Cola, and then I moved to Georgia for a couple years, and I sold insurance for Delta Insurance, and then I came back to Florida, worked on a ranch for a little while, and a friend of mine told me about the Department of Corrections, and that's where I wound up.
And the rest was history. You ended up 25 years.
Yeah.
From correctional officer to captain.
Yes.
And you know, it's funny how we all got to corrections. I got out of the Army, and I needed a job, and I heard about the state prison, Florida State Prison needed people, and I thought, I'll just take that as a temporary job, and I won't stay long. And then 28 years later, I'm retired from there. You know, so it's funny how we all get into corrections, but it is a career that will give you a pension, and it will give you a retirement. You just have to get to the end of the rainbow. Now, you also were very proficient in martial arts. You'd studied martial arts for years. Is that correct?
That's correct. I taught martial arts. I had a black belt in Hapkido and a brown belt in Wateroo.
And when you got into corrections, you actually became a self-defense instructor, not only for the prison training, but at the academy. Is that correct?
That's correct. Mainly firearms. I didn't do the self-defense for the academy, but a few times.
But you did the self-defense at the regular
at the institution.
Institutional training, okay. And at the academy, I believe you did many years with the firearms instructor.
Yes, probably close to 15, 20 years as a firearms instructor for the academy folk community.
Now, those folks in the Florida Department of Corrections will remember this, and the folks that aren't in Florida, there was also a shooting team that went around the state. Is that correct, in Florida Corrections?
Yes, it was Florida Peace Officers Association. I was a 7th District Director
But you also competed in that competition regularly, is that?
Yes, once a month we competed all over the state of Florida.
And, you know, I've had other videos where I've stressed the importance of firearms proficiency, even though we're correctional officers. We have times when we have hospital duty, we have transport, we have the perimeter duty. You need to be proficient with those weapons. And I've also had videos on physical fitness and how important it is to take self-defense. And a lot of people replied on one of my videos, not only physically fit, but you need to take some type of self-defense, even if it's minimal. Do you believe that's true?
I believe that's very true, because I taught like an 8-hour class a year for the officers, which, you know, I taught them the basics, and I would tell each one of them, you know, to go out and find a place where you can train more, or take what I've taught you and practice it with each other. Don't just, you know, the 8 hours and forget about it, because it came in handy for me knowing what I knew over the years that I was an officer.
And 8 hours a year is just for the department to get it on the record books that they trained you 8 hours, but to save your life down the road during an inmate attack, you really need to have some experience.
And
now, just let us know a little history about when you got into the corrections department as a correctional officer, and the areas you worked and how you worked your way up.
Okay, I started out, well, back when I started, it was Sheriff's Department and the state. We all went to the same academy. And once I got out of the academy, I took and they put me in Fox dorm, which was a big T dorm. And they stuck me in there by myself back then. There had 250 inmates and just me, and I didn't even know how to work the panel board in the officer station. And old Sergeant looked at me and says, "You see that inmate? Ask him how to do it. He'll tell you everything you need to know." And he's the only one that's allowed into the officer station. I said, okay. So sure enough, I went in there and he showed me how to open all the doors and everything, and how to even fill out my paperwork and do the count. And I'm thinking to myself, what did I get into?
Well, and let me tell you, the same with me when I started. They said, if you have any questions about things in the dorm or whatever, ask an inmate. Now, folks, you probably won't see that much today. We're talking about some old school Florida corrections when we started, you know, and they said the inmates know where everything is. Today, it may still happen in some places, but we're talking way back when, and we went through the transition from the old to the new. So remember, these are true stories. These things really happen. So for those newer officers watching this video, don't go, "Oh my God, they let the inmate." This is the old days, folks. We're transitioning up to the new.
Oh yeah. And you know, as it progressed on, you know, that times had changed, and they required more than one officer working in the dorms. And because when you had a problem, you know, we called the 1024. People came. You know, we did back up each other back then. Everybody was very close and like a big family, and we took care of each other. And situations happened quite a bit back in the day. I mean, there was a lot of gangs, Miami against Tampa and areas like that, and you had to constantly be on your toes and watching, and some really bad things wound up happening. And that same dorm I worked, I wasn't there that day, but we had an inmate. He got stabbed like 20 some times, and they were painting a dorm, and the guy poured paint thinner on him and was fixing to light him up when a new officer come up. The guy just gave up and put his hands behind his back. And the majority of the inmates we had back then, they were all close custody, and most of them were in for murder anyway. And and we had a lot of Marios that came, and they mostly stayed to themselves, but they were a very dangerous group at that time, and you had to be very careful. Even a lot of the other inmates were afraid of them because they wouldn't argue with you or anything. They just try to kill you.
Right. Right. I had a case at Hendry Correctional Institution. This was probably 2003, where we had some inmates from down in the Miami area, and they were in for murder, and one killed the other inmate, stabbed him to death in the dorm because they had an argument watching TV, and the inmate made it outside the dorm and fell down dead outside the dorm because he was trying to get help, and he made it just outside the dorm and fell right there. And when I interviewed the inmate that stabbed him, he said, "I killed him. No issues, no worries. In for life." The state attorney tacked another 45 years, and we sent him up north to Union and FSP to lock him up 23 hours a day. That's the best we could do because they have nothing to lose and they don't care. One other thing I want to say is we just, not that long ago in Florida, stopped smoking in the prison system. So they always had matches on them. You were talking about he was going to light them up. Now, not that they don't have matches still today. Even with the smoking rule, the non-smoking rule, they have smuggled lighters and smuggled matches and smuggled cigarettes. So, now they're not allowed to smoke, so now cigarettes are part of a big smuggling program, and the cigarettes have now joined the drugs as a big commodity needed in the prison, and they're worth more money now. So I don't know which is the best of two evils. Not smoking, so now they smuggle them in and pay people to smuggle them in, or just let them smoke. I don't know which is better. But anyway, Captain Canady, when you worked in the system, talk about how you got from CO1 to captain and the places you worked in the prison, and then I want to ask you about a couple of stories that you encountered.
Okay, like I said, I started out in one of the T dorms, and then you got moved around quite a bit. So, the open bays, and finally I got inside grounds, and I've been on several escapes and seen a lot of escape attempts, and but later on I started seeing how the state would pay for your classes, educational classes, and to better yourself in your job. So every time one came up, I would take the class, instructor classes, just like firearms and DT instructors, and I was first responders instructors. Just about any instructor class, I'd had it. I'd actually maxed out on them, and I figured that would help me later on. I went from inside grounds. I started working public works for a while in the towns. We had inmate crews and stuff, and we would take them to different towns and did a lot of work and saved the cities a lot of money. And then later I went to work with DOT and Department of Transportation, and we worked inmates along the main highways, all the interstates, and did a little bit of everything there, and which was a pretty good job because at the time we worked 12-hour shifts, and it wound up a little more than 12 hours, but we got paid overtime, and we only worked 4 days a week. So I had Friday, Saturday, and Sundays off, and which I worked a part-time job doing that. I was a bouncer on the side, making a little extra money.
Over in Lakeland, Florida, right?
Yeah, yes. And so I worked that for a while and decided, well, I wanted to start moving my career up and not just work as a CO. And I made more money working DOT than a sergeant did, but I was willing to take that cut and start moving up. So I came back and went to work on main unit again, and in the confinement unit, which we had a lot of crazy stuff happening there. And so I put in for sergeant, and I got the sergeant position, and I worked the main unit for a couple of years, and then I transferred over to the work camp and was a sergeant over there. And I put in for a lieutenant position, and there was 2 open. So me and a friend of mine, we were both sergeants together there at the work camp. So we both got lieutenant at the same time. And so I was working shift, and so half the time it was like we said, we were always short-handed, and my officers were getting burned out. But it was so bad that one night I just told them to go home. I would cover it as a CO. I was a lieutenant, but I sat in the dorm all night to cover for some of my officers, help them out. And so I kept continually teaching and the firearms and DT at the institution, and I was still working for the academy teaching firearms. And so then when the captain's position come up, I was pretty much told I needed to put in for that captain slot. Actually, I had been working at the main unit as an acting captain when I was a lieutenant. So when I put in for captain position, I went through all the tests and interviews and stuff, and the next day I came in, the colonel called me in the office. He says, I got some good news and I got some bad news. He goes, congratulations, Captain. He says, go home, you start midnight tonight.
And I remember that day.
Yeah.
Because my office was, at that time, in the administrative building.
Yes.
At Polk Correctional.
Right.
And I remember you came to me and said, I got captain, but I got to go get some sleep. I'm captain now, and I start midnights tonight. So congratulations, and get your butt to work.
Yeah. See, because I'd already been acting as a captain for like 2 months already when I was a lieutenant.
Without the pay.
Without the pay.
And that day you started with the captain's pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a world in corrections where you have to be flexible, and you have to be ready for surprises, and you have to be ready to adjust. And let me tell you, if you can't handle the heat, you're not going to make it to the end of the rainbow. And now, in corrections, recently on one of the news channels, I think it was ABC. I don't want to say for sure. They said that corrections is being noted as the toughest job in America in many places. And we have to agree with that. We see a lot of things that regular people don't see. We see good things happen, and man, do we see a lot of bad things happen.
A lot of bad things.
And self-inflicted wounds by inmates is one of the things that we see. Now, this is where my warning disclaimer comes in for 18 and above. Captain, tell us about that inmate that was inflicting wounds upon his private areas, and what else he did. And these are some of the things that we deal with in corrections.
Yes, this was a lot of years ago. I was working confinement unit. We had an inmate in there. He was in on rape on. He was a child molester on young babies, 3 up to 5 years old, and he would actually take a razor if he got it, and he would cut all his genitalia, his penis and the scrotum and stuff like that, and he would just start slashing. And they take that away, and somehow one time he got some matches and stuck one of them up the head of his penis, believe it or not, and lit it. And but they got him, and they sew him back together and stuff like that. But it was some really crazy stuff.
That's one example of what we deal with, the inmates inflicting self-inflicted wounds, and it's our duty, care, custody, and control. We have to respond as a first responder. We have to get this inmate, we have to call medical, we have to get him to medical, and over and over and over again they get treated, and
Yep.
If they can get their hands on something, this type of inmate, they'll cut themselves again, and they may cut you. And when you respond to these type incidents, you have to be so careful, because bodily fluids can get all over you, and we don't know if this inmate has a disease or not. Not only that, if he cut himself, we know he has a weapon. So when we respond to this incident, we have to be careful that he doesn't turn around and slice us. It's a very dangerous environment. We're going to move on to another dangerous situation, and we have a actual story here. Officers injured from inmate attacks, and this was a deadly attack. And tell us about the female officer that got attacked at Polk.
Yes, I was a lieutenant at the work camp at the time, and our sergeant that was in the control room all of a sudden came over the radio and said that there was an attack going on at the main unit, that an inmate had stabbing a female officer. So I grabbed all the guys I could, and we took off over there, and they shot us right on in, and I had about 8 guys with me, and we headed down there. But as we went down, they had the situation under control by the time we got there, luckily. And but the inmate was mad at the female because she'd wrote him a disciplinary report. He had 11.5-inch shank. He had stabbed her twice in the throat, and then the male sergeant, he had pushed her back, and he got stabbed in the stomach with the shank. And then some of the officers got down there, and they took the inmate down and retrieved the weapon. And we were trying to get medical department. It was private medical department, and we're trying to get one down for help with her and the officer. They were still there, and she flat out refused. The nurse would not come down. She was too scared. And so we wound up getting the officers to the gate, and the ambulance was already on the way, and got them to the hospital. And the inmate was already cuffed and was taken up. And but the nurse, we actually escorted her off the compound.
I was about to say, this nurse better have lost her job. She better have lost her job for not responding.
She was advised never to step on state property again.
Good. That's if you can't do your job, we don't need you. You need to get out the door. I know we have staff shortages, and I know we need all the help we can get, but we don't need that kind of help, the kind that won't respond.
No,
and that goes for officers too. You better get off your butt and respond to help your fellow officer, or you should be escorted off the compound. I just had to throw that in. That's my thoughts.
Oh, yeah. You know. I almost kicked the door off the hinges one day. We had one, I was a CO, I hadn't been there long, but we had this old-time sergeant. He worried about the door being clean more than he did anything else. And I looked outside, and I seen one of the inmates had like a 2-pound weight in a sock, was swinging at an officer. And so I told him to open the door. The officer needed help, and he said, "Well, we need to get this stuff done." So I I kicked the door, and you know, they're huge steel doors, and I rattled pretty much the whole building. And I told him, I said, if you don't open the door, I'm going to kick this door off the hinges. So he popped the door, and I ran, and I took the inmate out that had the weight in the sock and stuff. And luckily the other officer had been hurt, but he had made contact with another inmate and hurt him up pretty good with it and stuff. But it was a lot of different things that came up like that.
And folks, know your priorities. If an officer is in trouble, or we even believe that the officer could be in trouble, we don't give a darn if your floors are wet, they just got mopped, whatever. You got to have priorities and some common sense. You know, if you have common sense and you're willing to do your job and be there for your fellow officer, you're going to be a better officer than somebody that has a master's degree and no common sense.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
You always had to be there for your fellow officer no matter what. We've had them where we've actually had to escort an officer off the compound because they seen a situation where we were having to fight inmates outside of their dormitory, and after they seen that was like the guy's second day there, and he said he called the control room and said he wanted to escort off the compound. He quit, and we actually had to escort this. Well, I wouldn't call him an officer, but we escorted him off the compound.
And some other things we have to deal with is for our security purposes. You don't know that I'm going to bring this up, but you were a lieutenant at the time, right before you got promoted to captain. And an inmate that we used to call him the tractor boy. He would go out on the tractor and work the fields and stuff with the tractor. He had come to you with some information that a visitor was dropping off large amounts of drugs.
Marijuana.
And the dog boy, the inmate that goes out and takes care of the dogs, the bloodhounds, was retrieving these drugs and hiding them until he could get them smuggled in by under the lawnmowers or any which way they could find a way to smuggle them in. You remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
And Lieutenant Canady came to me and told me about it, and we set up a little operation. And the tractor boy, the inmate that drove the tractor, would inform, at the time, Lieutenant Canady, when the drop-off was going to be, so that we could be there for it, and then when the dog boy was going to pick up the drugs.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, we got a good bust off that. Now, this is another thing in prison. You have to watch for contraband. If you get word of contraband, and I just want to prove a point. Inmates make a lot of false allegations. We know that. But sometimes they tell a true story, and this was a true story. So you have to follow up on the allegations. If they're wrong, we'll take action against the inmate, hopefully, for lying, and we'll give them a DR for lying. Right. And hopefully that's being done. But if the inmate's telling the truth, we have to follow up on these things. And we followed up on it. And long story short, the dog boy had taken a water igloo, a round one, from one of the trucks, from one of the outside grounds trucks. And he buried it in the woods. And when the drugs were dropped off by the visitors on Sunday, he would run out Monday morning, look around, grab a dog and run the dog for exercise, go in the get the drugs and then throw them in the igloo and then cover it back up. So the igloo was buried in the woods. Long story short, between looking at his mail and listening to his phone call, we pressured him and said, "You're going to show us where those drugs are." And he took us out to the woods. He said, "You're going to need a shovel." So we got a shovel. And he took us to the woods, and we took pictures before, during the time he was digging up this igloo, and after, and lo and behold, he opens it up. And there is a lot of marijuana in that igloo. Yeah. And he was getting it in small increments at a time.
Right.
So, folks, watch your inmates, and when they make an allegation, follow up on it. Check it out.
Check it out. Never know what you're going to find.
So that's just another thing in the life of a correctional officer that we deal with. There's another thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Don't let your ego make you lose your job.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, an inmate calls you names. An inmate's locked behind a cell door, and he's calling you names, and he's calling your mother every name in the book, and you decide to open the door and go in and kick his ass. Excuse me for the better term word, but, well, you know what? Words won't hurt you. Have you seen guys with such a big ego that they let things get to them?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't make it 25, 30, 35 years in this career with a big ego.
No. Yeah, I tell them, I said, it's just a big game. You know, they're trying to get over on us, and our game was to catch them at it and to take care of it. And, you know, I would go in there and like we had one inmate going off in confinement, and I had a new female officer, and she had wanted to come along with me, and so we went in there, and the officer in there, he just kept wanting to argue with the inmate, and I looked at him and I told him, I said, listen, I'm training this officer here. I said, I don't care what's going on, but you need to straighten up and do all the stuff. And I kept talking to him, but at first he was kind of ready to argue, and I kept talking to him and kept a calm demeanor. After a while, he started talking back, and so, you know, the situation was taken care of instead of having to go in there and take him down and put him in a management cell. You know, some of them you couldn't talk to. You had to go in, and I've had to go in on a lot of them, and we had a management cell that we put them into at the end of the confinement unit, but you did what you had to do to take care of it.
Exactly, and don't argue with the inmates because that's what they want you to do.
Oh, yeah.
They think it's funny if they can get you in a verbal argument. What have they got to do 24 hours a day? They want you to argue with them. Don't argue with them. They either do it or they don't, and if they don't do it, if it's not an immediate threat, we're going to put some paperwork on them, and in the prison system, you can put them in confinement. In some jails you can, in some jails, you know, they just put them in their cell and lock them down for 24 hours or whatever. But if it's an immediate threat, we're going to take care of that as well. We'll call for backup and take care of it as well. But don't argue with them. Now you're playing into their hand and playing into their game.
Right.
And that's another thing we deal with in the life of a correctional officer. So, and then to kind of end it out here on a sad note, 5,000 first responders were surveyed according to a Corrections One article, and nearly 60% of the 5,000 that were surveyed, we have many more than that in the country, but I guess they just picked out 5,000, and they said they, at one time or another in their career, dealt with trauma, dealt with alcohol issues, or had suicidal thoughts. Now, you know, it's a tough career, and there's days that you go home and you say, man, can I make it? But you can make it. But for those that are having these problems, have you ever had an officer, when you were sergeant, lieutenant, or captain, that you had to counsel and take to the side or seek help for?
Yeah, I had a few like that, you know, you could tell, you know, and you had to, you know, keep talking to them and stuff. And actually, when I was a lieutenant, I had a really young officer, and I don't know what was going on in his life, but he had a good job. He was working inside grounds, which was an admin job, weekends and holidays off. And he was like 23 years old. And one day I came in and they had told me that he had committed suicide. And, and he never showed anything like that. He didn't smile a lot, but, he was always outgoing and ready to talk to you and stuff. And that was one of my biggest shocks working my career, was that young man taking his life.
When my wife and I left the Florida Department of Corrections and went to work for the sheriff's office, we had an officer that we worked with, and he was a very good officer. He was sharp dressed, his uniform always ironed or pressed, and he was very thorough in the pods in the jail. And we came to work one morning, and they announced at briefing that he had committed suicide the night before. And they hit home.
Yes.
We hear about it all the time, but when it happens to someone on your shift, it really hits home, and it's a shame. So the reason I want to talk about this is part of the life of corrections. Folks, if you feel depressed, if you feel you're having any issues with any kind of alcohol or substance abuse or anything, things are going bad, please go to your supervisor. And supervisors, I hope you take action, because a good supervisor will lead you in the right direction. Go to your supervisor and tell them. Sometimes we can't see. Depression and suicidal issues are the silent killer. Some of us may not ever recognize it. The gentleman I just talked about, we didn't see any signs. We had no clue. Did you have it?
None at all.
You've got to come and say something, and we will get you to Human Resources, and we will get you someone who can help you.
They do have help for the officers, and it's not going to go against you.
No.
You have a problem. We had an officer that had an alcohol problem, and he didn't lose his job. They sent him to classes and a place where he could rehabilitate himself and to get off of the alcohol. And he kept his job. Come back when he got done and did good and started back right where he was at.
We want everybody to complete their career in corrections. And the last thing I want to throw in quickly is staff-inmate relationships. Usually, or always are, through inmate manipulation. Now, I'm not going to get into staff-inmate relationship stories, but that's how those start. Inmates will attempt to manipulate you to get anything, from one little piece of candy to sex, or have you smuggle drugs and weapons in. Don't fall for it. No. How many have we seen fall for inmate manipulation that lost their jobs?
Lots and lots of them, and they always start out small, and they have 24 hours a day to figure out who they can do it with, and they study the officers, they study the free people that work in the institution, and they know, they always have someone trying to get close to that person and find out what's going on in their life, and they see who the weakest is, and when they do, they're like wolves. They go on it, and they finally, after a while, they give up, and like I said, it'll start out small, then they got you, you'll lose your job, and they threaten you with it. They usually have a couple of inmates over on the side where they're watching you, and they see you when you give them whatever, and so he's got you. He said, "There's my witnesses," and so next thing you know, he's telling you to bring in drugs, and then when you do that, then you wind up in jail.
That's right. Be fair, firm, and consistent, and set your boundaries from the beginning. Older officers, you need to get those new officers lined up in that manner. And older officers, don't become complacent. Remember, don't get lax and let your guard down. It's a tough job. It's a tough career, but you can do it. And there's many advantages at the end.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's medical and dental and health benefits. There's your pension. There's programs like the drop program for money, which is equal to a 401k, or you can do your own 401k. And you can come through this and have a good life. We're both retired now.
Yes.
We're both retired, and we're comfortable. Yeah. So we may not be rich,
No.
but we're comfortable. Okay.
Right.
And that's the main thing. Be comfortable. Some of the best joys in life are the simple pleasures. And we want you to live through this career and live on many more years to enjoy a fishing trip,
Oh, yeah.
a cruise. We're going on a cruise in December. There's a lot of things out there that you need to enjoy in life, and do that while you're working too. Try to get that time with your family and friends and enjoy your life to help get your mind eased, and so when you go back to work you can deal with these things. And I really appreciate you coming in today and talking with me.
I appreciate you having me.
Canady, and we could go on. We could go on for hours with stories.
Oh, yeah.
We fit in 40 minutes here, and we tried to hit pieces here and there to give you a general idea of the life of a correctional officer. We could sit here all afternoon and talk about stories. There's so many things that have happened.
Got hundreds.
Yeah. So we tried to give you a piece of the life of a correctional officer today. We thank you. Stay safe. Keep your head on a swivel. Back up your fellow officers. And God bless all of you. Take care, everybody.